Hi everyone, Crista Cowan here with another episode of The Barefoot Genealogist. Today we are going to talk about top tips for finding your Virginia ancestors. Just going to be some really basic information for those of you who are just getting started into Virginia research. We're going to talk about some basic genealogy principles. We're going to talk about some basic vital records information about the state of Virginia, and then I'll show you several resources available on Ancestry.com so that you can further your education about Virginia research so that you can have success in finding those ancestors. Let's go ahead and dive in. Let's just first talk about some basic genealogy principles in relationship to Virginia research. One of the genealogical proof standards basic steps, as a matter of fact, it's the very first step, is a reasonably exhaustive search. What that means is that you need to start to understand as you go looking for your ancestors in any particular location, what records exist for that location. That means you need to start seeing, like when did they start keeping birth, marriage, and death records? What kind of probate records are kept? And then the second part of that is where those records are located. Have those records been digitized and put online? Have they been microfilmed and are they available to rent through some kind of an interlibrary loan system? Or do those records only exist in original format in the county courthouse or the town hall or the state archive where they've been put? So that's one of the things that I want to start to get you to wrap your head around today as we talk about Virginia is both what records exist for Virginia and where those records are located. Our time together certainly doesn't allow us to be exhaustive. This is just kind of a beginning glimpse into what's available. There are some excellent courses on Virginia research that are available if you want to dive deeper into it. Keep in mind that Virginia has been peopled by Europeans since the early 1600s. Actually, the late 1500s originally. Those settlements didn't last, of course. Even the first Jamestown settlement didn't last. But since the 1600s, early 1600s, we've had people continuously in the Virginia territory, or the Virginia Commonwealth, is what it was called, or just what it's called today still. And that Virginia territory covered a lot of area originally before additional states were carved out of that particular land. And so even though your people may have lived in what is now considered North Carolina, even parts of Massachusetts, believe it or not, then that still could have been part of Virginia at the time. So understanding both when your ancestor lived there and what the landscape was like at the time is really important. I've shared this before, but one of my favorite resources for understanding the landscape or the boundary changes of a particular area is called mapofus.org. It looks like Map of Us, mapofus.org. If you scroll down, you're going to see a map of the United States, and if you click on a particular state, what it does is it takes you to an animated map, or essentially of what that particular territory was like at different periods of time. And so here we can see this map of Virginia starts in 1617, and these borders are pretty wide open, right? As a matter of fact, there are no borders here other than the border created by the seashore on the eastern side and then the border across the southern part of the state. And so then as you go year by year, you actually start to see a more formal formation of both the state and the counties within the state. And so again, pinpointing when your ancestor was there and what the borders were at the time that they were there will help you understand a little bit more about them and their lives, but it will also help you understand where to start looking for some of those records. Now, of course, the question is always asked, do I look for the records in the old county or the new county? And the answer to that question is yes. Sometimes the records stayed with the old county. Sometimes the records moved to the new county. And so sometimes you have to look in both places to find the records that you're looking for about a particular ancestor. But as you can see here, this particular area over the course of a couple hundred years had some pretty drastic changes in borders pretty continually. Almost every few years, we've got new counties being created. We've got new borders being drawn around those counties. We've got counties being split into multiple counties. And ultimately, in the case of Virginia, we've got entire new states being created out of these particular areas. And so, again, that's mapofus.org. And then if you just click on Virginia, you can work your way through a little bit at a time with this animated map, or you can click directly here to a specific year to see what it looked like at that particular time. Really important when doing research to understand the boundaries of the place at the time that your ancestors lived there, so that you can understand more about the records that might exist and where those records might be located today. Couple of cautions, and I use these cautions actually for any kind of research, but the names that you're searching for, the people that you're searching for, just remember their names might not be as unique as you think they are for that particular time and place. I've come across some very unusual names in doing some Virginia research back in the early 1700s, even into the late 1600s. And I think, man, that's such a unique name. Surely this is the only person that has that name, only to find out that they've got a first cousin and an uncle all with the same name as well. So just be aware of that. Also, another caution about name, or another piece of information about names for those of you who are brand new to family history research: don't get hung up on spelling. Consistency in spelling, even of one's own name, is a fairly new phenomenon. It's not something that was really needed until the early part of the 1900s, or even until Social Security started coming around, where we had to have consistency of name spelling as part of our identity. Before that, a person could spell their name however, phonetically, or with an S at the end, without an S at the end. I've seen all sorts of different variations of ways people spell their own names. And then keep in mind that many of our ancestors did not read and write. And so the places we see their names spelled, it's being spelled by whatever clerk or a recorder who is writing the name at the time chose to spell it phonetically, because our particular ancestor may not have even known how to spell their own name. And so keep in mind, don't get hung up on name spellings or the fact that they have to be exactly identical in the records. And the further back in time you go, the more inconsistencies you're likely to see. Final caution, before we move on to looking at some very specific information about Virginia records, is to be a researcher, not just a searcher. One of the things that I've discovered is we have so much available at our fingertips now than we ever did before, and I think it's wonderful that there's so much available just from my computer, is that it's really easy to just try to plug something into a search engine and hope I get what I want. But I need to put a little bit more thought into it. Keep in mind, we're looking for records about people. We're not looking for people. People do not exist in databases online, but records about them and their lives do. And so think about what kind of record you're looking for, or think about what kind of a genealogy question you might want to answer, and then maybe make a little list of the kinds of records that might help you answer that particular question. You're going to have a whole lot more success. Okay, let's talk about vital records in particular for Virginia. Vital records are birth, marriage, and death records. Those are the gold standard, or the record that we always hope to find when we're doing family history. One of the challenges is that many of those records don't exist. And so here is the state of vital records for the state of Virginia. First of all, marriage bonds. Marriage has always been this community contract. And so a bond was often put up by family members or close friends or relatives of the bride or groom. The groom would have to put up a bond that he was indeed free to marry and that he would go through with the marriage. And he would forfeit that bond if for any reason it was discovered that he was not eligible to be married or that he didn't go through with the marriage. And so marriage bonds have been, those bonds are collected by the counties, and there's paperwork that's signed, and many of those marriage bonds have been transcribed and published in book format by genealogical societies and archives and organizations for decades and decades. And so we've got publications of some of those marriage bonds that are transcriptions. Some of the originals of those marriage bonds have been microfilmed, and some of those are available through the Family History Library. You can rent that microfilm to your local Family History Center. And a few of those marriage bonds have actually been digitized and put online at various places. And so that's really exciting when you can see an actual original image of a marriage bond and get the feel for both that custom as well as the genealogically relevant information that's available on that. Now, births and deaths, a little bit different. Births and deaths in Virginia were not recorded fairly consistently until 1853, and even then they were only recorded at a county level. So from 1853 to 1896, the birth and death records that exist for the state of Virginia typically, again, were recorded at a county level, and they're not entirely consistent, right? Not everybody born in those years had their birth or death recorded. As a matter of fact, in particular during the war years, the Civil War years, we see the compliance with that registration go down significantly. We also have the tragedy then of burned courthouses as well. In some cases where those records were recorded at a county level, if those courthouses happened to suffer damage during the war or in subsequent years for various reasons, wars, floods, whatever, those records have been lost. So there are records that exist from 1853 to 1896. Those records, again, were recorded at a county level. Some of those records survive. And so it's good to know that those records do exist, and hopefully the record that you're looking for exists, but just be aware that it might not. Now, statewide registration of births, marriages, and deaths in Virginia did not begin until 1912. What that means is you've got this pretty big gap there between 1896 and 1912 where nobody was responsible for recording those births, marriages, and deaths. And so there's a gap, and there are some records of births, marriages, and deaths during those years. Some people still continue to register, some random counties still continue to collect that information. But for the most part, between 1896 and 1912, there aren't any record of those births, marriages, and deaths in that time period. What that means is that we have to look to other sources for some of these things. It also means that before 1853, we have this huge gap, right, of births and deaths. And so again, we have to look to other sources. So two of the really big sources available for Virginia records, one is probate records. Probate records, typically when we say probate, we think about a will. Of course, that is not the only thing included in probate. Probate records are any of the court records that are generated in the settlement of an estate after somebody has passed away. Now, your ancestor does not have to have been wealthy by any means in order to have a probate. They could have had very, very little property. They could have had no property and just had children that needed to be accounted for. They could have had, so it varies, right? So don't assume just because your ancestor was a poor farmer that there is no probate record. Even if they just owned a little spot of land, that then becomes necessary to take care of the inheritance situation. So we have two different kinds of probate. Well, we have two different kinds of probate situations. One is if they die intestate, and one is if they die testate. And so the difference is whether they had a will or not. And different paperwork is generated based on that. And so probate records are often entire files with a will, without a will, with an estate inventory, with information about guardianship, with information about the executors of the will. And sometimes those probate cases can go on for years. And so just because your ancestor may have died in a particular year, don't stop looking. Sometimes there are records that are generated long, and by long I mean years, after their death. Most of the probate records for the state of Virginia that were created at a county level, which all of them were, have been microfilmed, and that microfilm has been digitized by Family Search on Family Search, and Ancestry is currently in an agreement with Family Search where we are indexing those probate records. That was announced at Roots Tech a couple of years ago. We are in the process of indexing all of those probate records. So keep your eye out on our site. We will be releasing those records soon, and I'm really excited about that, to be able to spend some time with those probate records. Probate records have a lot of really rich genealogical detail, mostly because they contain information about relationships. And so not only do you have information about when a will was probated or when a probate case was opened, that lets you know that somebody has passed away, so that you have a death date or an approximate death date, you also end up with information about relationships, spouses' names, children's names, sometimes grandchildren's names, the married names of daughters, which is really exciting. Lots of really great ways to tie families together. Sometimes you even have the names of deceased children written into a will, and it explicitly states that they're deceased. And again, that gets you closer to some of that death information that might not have been recorded at a county or a state level. Now, one of the ways that I record some of that information is sometimes you just have to settle yourself with the fact, once you've done a reasonably exhaustive search, that you may never find an exact death date. Maybe the tombstone just lists a year, the probate file has a date on when the will was written, and then maybe when the file was when the will was probated or proved. And so you've got some approximate dates. Obviously, you know the person was alive when they wrote the will, and you know that they were deceased by the time the will was proved. And so sometimes, usually what I'll do if I can't find an exact date is I will just put before, BEF is the abbreviation, the standard abbreviation for that. I'll put before and then the date that the will was proved as the death date. That lets me know in my own records that I've done a reasonably exhaustive search, that I have not been able to locate an exact death date from any other sources. Very often I'll put that information into the notes for the person. So I'll include information about how the tombstone only lists the year, and the date the will was written on this date, and the will was proved on this date. And so therefore I've chosen this as the death date, that they died before the will was proved. And sometimes we have to be satisfied with the fact that that's as close as we might get to a particular death date. Again, particularly in a time before that 1853 date, where deaths were not necessarily recorded at a county or a local level at all. Another huge resource for Virginia, research is newspapers. A lot of really great newspapers have been published out of the state of Virginia for centuries, and so we have a lot of great information available in some of those records. Some of them, like as you get closer to the coast, contain information about passengers. So you get newspapers that were publishing passenger lists of people incoming into the country in that particular newspaper. Local newspapers in smaller communities, sometimes published at a county level or a little regional level, sometimes published directly in a town or city, will have information about the local community. And so I've often referred to newspapers as the Facebook of their day. People recorded their comings and goings in the newspaper with alarming detail. Sometimes we think about, the privacy of things, and yet these people are recording who's coming and going from town, and what they had for dinner, and what they served at the cocktail party, and who came over to play cards with, who, and who just had a baby, and just lots of really great information, who graduated, who got married. And so we start to see some of these milestone events in some of the lives of, even, again, you don't have to have been wealthy or prominent in a community necessarily to be included in these. We start to see some of this detail, though, about their lives as people finish school, as they get married, as they have children. Even as some of those children move away and come back and visit, you'll see, again, coming back to visit with new children that they've had since they lived in that community. So newspapers are a really excellent way of tracing the movements of the people in your family. Let me just show you online a couple of really great resources now on Ancestry so that you can further your Virginia education. The first thing is going to be our Virginia State Guide. Ancestry has worked really hard to put together some of these state research guides. They are free, and they are PDF files, so you can download them, print them out if you'd like. They're all found in the Learning Center. So if you just click on Learning Center, you're going to see a link there to the research guides. Again, they are free. You do not have to have a current subscription to Ancestry to access those. Go ahead and click on that research guide link. That's going to take you to a list of all of the research guides that we have, and there are a lot of them. If you're not familiar with those, I would encourage you to just spend some time looking at some of those titles. But we do have an entire section of state research guides. And then the states there are listed alphabetically. So I can come down here to Virginia, and here you're going to see that, again, this is a PDF file that you can print out. There's some basic Virginia history, just to make sure that you've got your timelines accurate. That's important, okay? We want to make sure that we don't have people being born in Virginia in the 1400s. That sounds silly, but sometimes we get a little mixed up with our timelines. So we do have some basic history. We also have some basic information about census records in Virginia, the first census being taken in February of 1624, and then some various censuses taken or census substitutes, things like tax lists and tax rolls are going to be included there. And then we do have an actual timeline of some significant moments in Virginia history that might have affected the lives of your ancestors. Keep in mind there's also some information in this timeline about when major groups of immigrants moved to different areas of the Virginia territory. And so it's important to know that, because if you've got a family living in a particular place in Virginia at a specific time, it very well could be that they are Protestants from New Jersey that settled there, or understanding which groups of people, both religiously as well as from where in Europe they were coming, might help you understand your ancestors a little bit better and where to research next. Scroll down again through this timeline. Past that, you're going to see some basic information about Virginia vital records. One of the benefits of having these PDFs online is that every one of these references to a particular set of records is a clickable link. So you can print it out and use it as a reference, but if you're using it online, you're going to see that these are clickable links, again, to records available on Ancestry, both for vital records and for military records. And then we're also going to have some clickable links here to some other locations where you can find records about Virginia. Most notably, you're going to want to look at the Library of Virginia. Library of Virginia has a huge collection of archives and manuscripts, and they've got old family Bibles, they've got photographs, and their online catalog is terrific to get you into that information and into that detail. There's a link to the Virginia Historical Society and the Virginia Genealogical Society, the Virginia GenWeb Project, which is a volunteer online collection of information about Virginia, and then there's a drill down to specific counties so that you can learn more about the specific county that you're interested in or that you're researching. So that is our Virginia State Guide. I would encourage you to go spend some time with that. The other resource we have available is our Family History Wiki. So in the Family History Wiki, what we've done is we have digitized the source and the Red Book. Excuse me. And the Red Book is organized by location. And so I can just come in here, click on the Red Book, scroll down to Virginia, and what you're going to see is a series of articles written about Virginia research by experts in Virginia research. You're also going to see a sidebar over here to information about specific kinds of records. So we've spoken about vital records today. I mentioned census records briefly, and we talked about probate records, but there are so many other kinds of records. Land records, really valuable for genealogical research, again, especially as you get back into those early time periods, into the 1600s and the 1700s. We've got court records. Tax records are critical for putting together families, for figuring out when people come of age, from sorting out people of a common name. Tax records become really valuable for that. Cemetery records, church records, military records. There's those newspapers that we talked about. There's a link to immigration into Virginia, African American resources for Virginia, specific county and city resources. Maps, of course, are invaluable for understanding the boundaries and the boundary changes. And then there's a link there to other archives and libraries and societies in Virginia on the ground that might be able to provide you with information that's not yet available online. So Virginia's a lot to wrap our heads around. It's a lot to wrap our research arms around. And one of the reasons is because, it's been peopled by Europeans in particular for several hundred years. And so lots of really great records have been kept for a really long time. And it's hard to just say, here's how you research Virginia, because it's a very different beast if you're researching Virginia in 1920 versus 1720. Last resource that I want to show you, if you are not yet familiar with this, it's my favorite resource on Ancestry.com, and that is the card catalog. You're going to find the card catalog on the search menu, and if you just click on that, that's going to take you to a listing of all of the databases that are available on Ancestry. Currently, there's 32,647 of them. And if I just come here in the title field and I type in Virginia and click search, you're going to see that 707 of the databases available on Ancestry currently are for Virginia records. Specifically, if you look right here at the top, you're going to see some 6.1 million Virginia marriage records dating from 1785 all the way through 1940, probably one of the most comprehensive collections. You're also going to see some West Virginia records. Remember, some of these states that were part of Virginia that broke off and became other states. So marriages, deaths, and births for West Virginia, a death and burial index for Virginia. Again, it's that 1853 date when the state started, when the counties started keeping that information. You're going to see links to land and probate records. You're also going to see links to a lot of publications. And that, again, is because Virginia has been around for so long, and so many of the people who are interested in Virginia research have created resources. In some cases, that's indexes or books, publications about records that are available. And sometimes the publications about the records are the only thing that still survive. Sometimes the original records don't necessarily still survive. But where they do, of course, all good genealogists know you want to get as close to that original as possible. So use some of these finding aids, like the Virginia Genealogical Society Quarterly, to do searches. You come in here and you search for a particular surname that you're interested in a specific county or location in Virginia, and see what resources are available to you. You'll see here, for example, again, here's a collection of compiled biographies of prominent families in Virginia. As you get further back in time, the likelihood that your ancestor is somebody of prominence actually increases because the population decreases. And so you may have somebody of prominence in your family that you didn't even know. So we've got several volumes of those that you can search. We've got some Quaker records that are affiliated with that, lots of Revolutionary War records, some genealogies that have been published for various counties. Again, spend some time exploring the card catalog and just seeing what records might exist that might have something to do with the specific location or surnames that you're searching in Virginia. And like I said, I use the card catalog a lot. It is my favorite resource on our website because it provides us with just an insight into what records exist and where those records might be located. And once I've mastered that, then of course I know that I have the tools at my disposal to be able to say that I have done a reasonably exhaustive search in order to locate the person or people in my family tree that I'm looking for. Well, hopefully that was a good introduction to some top tips for finding your Virginia ancestors. If you have questions specifically about that, please feel free to email. Also, we're putting together the June and July live stream calendars right now. So if you have suggestions for topics you'd like to see addressed in future episodes of our show, please email me at ask@ancestry.com with those suggestions. And then check that Ancestry Facebook page events tab sometime in the next couple of weeks to see a list of the topics, dates, and times for future live stream presentations. They will typically be on Tuesday mornings live, and then we do try to get those videos uploaded to our YouTube channel as quickly as possible in post-production. That's all I have prepared for you today. Until next time, this is Crista Cowan. Have fun climbing your family tree.